ignored for decades.
So take that caravan that was coming north and just send it south, full of...
With plenty of refreshments and clean clothes.
Right. Now, Donna Brazil, welcome to the Five.
Yes.
I know...
I've been waiting. I don't know why you didn't know my number.
I'm sorry, I must have lost it. So I know you've been wanting to talk about this IG report because you've been watching that for hours, but we're going to actually talk about the immigration situation. Now,
That's a good...
Secretary Nielsen said there are laws on the books that have encouraged this. There's a 2008 child trafficking law that's being abused. There's the Flores deal, which was a Clinton administration policy. You can't detain minors for more than 20 days. And then you have the asylum laws being abused. I mean, don't past administrations bear some responsibility for this?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that you have these two laws on the books, the 1997 law and the 2008 law. The difference is that this is a change in policy, a change in enforcement of the law. Everyone who comes over our border now is treated as a criminal, and they're subject to prosecution.
Correct.
And so while the 97 law said that you have 20 days to deal with these unaccompanied minors, this is a policy change that says we're going to separate these children from the parents who are going to face criminal prosecution.
Right.
So I think the Trump administration needs to work with Congress. Perhaps they'll do it with this immigration debate that they will have tomorrow, which, by the way, is a one-sided debate. I don't know how you're going to put together a solution when you don't have all of the what I call main ingredients. But for now, there's no federal law that says that you must separate children from their families. That's the loophole.
Well, one of the loopholes is because you don't want the children to be potentially abused, and you don't know, Kimberly, whether or not the children are actually related to the adult that's bringing them across the border, because the secretary said there's been over a 300% increase of fraudulent families.
314%.
Exactly, crossing the southern border.
Yeah, I think that's really an alarming number when you hear that and you think about that's really just fraught with problems in terms of risk to children and being endangered. Very much a concern in terms of human trafficking. Obviously, everybody cares about it, and obviously people don't want families separated from their children, but you do have an obligation to determine the true identity of the individuals coming over. Just because an adult is accompanying with a minor, you can't make the assumption that they are in fact related, because quite the contrary, the evidence suggests otherwise. So that would be irresponsible and reckless in a matter of public safety and endangerment to a child. So, this is a very difficult issue. I think the legislature does need to act on it expeditiously. It's in everyone's best interest to do so and work cooperatively with the president, because obviously now the good news is that the issue is getting a lot of, attention and focus and light on it so that we can do something about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a country of immigrants, but nevertheless, we've got to ensure the safety of people here, those crossing, et cetera, and observe the laws on the books.
And how do you think the White House, Dana, is handling this? I wouldn't call it a crisis, but it's reaching a boiling point across the country.
Definitely. Well, I think it was very smart to have the principal there today at the briefing. It took her a while to get back, and I understand they had a meeting at 3 o'clock with the president. And it's tense within the White House because they realize they have a problem. One thing I was surprised about is that Kirstjen Nielsen, she had excellent facts that they didn't recognize just even a week ago as we started seeing this bubbling up, that they needed to get in front of it. So now you have all of these photographs, some released from DHS, some from HHS, some from reporters that have been there, some from members of Congress who have been there. And the photographs drive a lot of things. Do you remember when the little boy was killed on the crossing, the migrant boy, and he washed up on the... Yes, and he washed up on the coast of Turkey. Then all of a sudden, we're like, we can't have this. And so it's not that it wasn't happening to a lot of children. It's just that photographs make a big difference. Kirstjen Nielsen was asked, what about these photographs? And she said, I haven't seen them. I think that her staff owes it to her to make sure that she sees them so that she's aware of what everybody out there is seeing and why there's all of this reaction. Maybe some of it, a lot of it based on misreporting. But you can also believe your own eyes.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's fair necessarily to say that children are being held in cages. But if you look at the photograph, they are chain link partitions. So they're being covered with silver Mylar blankets. And then you hear this ProPublica audio secretly recorded, maybe inappropriate, but the audio is going to pull at heartstrings tonight. And so, yes, I think that tomorrow when the president goes to the Congress, he's going to say, I am going to support these immigration bills. I want you to pass them. I hope that it's successful. I'm skeptical in a way, partly because I heard today that one of the people in leadership thinks it has a 10% chance of passing the House, and that a bill very similar, recently held in the Senate, only got 40 votes. So I think they're going to have to either reverse this policy or figure out another way to deal with it while they try to do something with Congress, because now you have a situation where Congress might not be able to pass anything.
Yeah, Greg, what do you think? Do you think the president's going to hang tough on this issue like he does in the face of a lot of outrage, or do you think he's going to come to the table and try to do something with the Democrats?
I think he likes solving problems, and I think he would solve this problem if he can. I don't think the other side wants to solve this problem because it's one hell of an issue. This is an amazing hammer that you can just pound the White House with. You take this off the table, and I've said this for months. If you take this off the table,
there's nothing left.
There's nothing left for the Democrats. I am so tired, though, of people implying that our agents are child abusers. This is something that we just let fly by. Oh, they're not being. People are doing their best. Imagine somebody coming to your house and dropping off kids. You try to do your best. That's what America is doing. They are dealing with an influx, thousands of kids. They're not sure what they're doing. They're doing their best. You have General Michael Hayden that is comparing us to the Holocaust,
right?
To concentration camps, an insult to victims, to survivors, to people who are taking care of these kids. I mean, that is idiotic. He is a fool.
But the stress, the harm, the abuse that comes when you're not capable of holding your child.
I understand.
You are pulling away parents from their children. A man committed suicide because he did not want to let go of his child. This is a crisis.
It's an emotional feeling. I get it.
When it comes to, and I'm not an emotional person. Seriously. But here's what I do know.
Yes.
Is that the Democrats, since you mentioned the Democrats, I wasn't going to mention because this should not be a partisan issue. These are children.
They're both sides are bad.
Regardless of what mistakes their parents are making or their caretaker, these are children, and we should have a special place in our heart for the children.
Well, let me ask you, though.
The Democrats do have a bill in the Senate.
Donna, let me ask you.
49 co-sponsors. That's all the Democrats
What is the Democratic solution? If you have, say, a 40-year-old migrant from God knows where, Central America, and he shows up and gets caught crossing the southern border with a 12-year-old girl, no documentation that they're related. What is the Border Patrol supposed to do according to a Democratic solution?
The solution clearly is that we have to vet the people who are coming here, whether they're seeking asylum.
How do you do that?
Well, that is what border agents are paid to do.
Right.
That is what the whole system.
But this is a part of the vetting process.
This is
you
a
make
part.
sure that they're related.
This is a change in policy, a change in prosecuting.
Okay,
people
so
who
you
are
want to go
coming
back to
across
catch
the
and
border.
release?
No, I'm saying that it's a misdemeanor versus putting them through all of this other legal rigmarole.
Okay, the legal rigmarole is to say you've broken the law and cross the border, you're going back home, not
Jesse,
show up in a month to a judge and then 90% never show up.
We all agree that our borders, our immigration system is broken. I'm not here to say that the immigration system is not, it's broken. All I'm saying is that we have a crisis right now. Dana is absolutely right. We should have seen this coming. The Department of Homeland Security should have seen it coming. Jeff Sessions should have seen it coming. And clearly Donald Trump should have seen it coming.
Well, I know, Kimberly, the one thing that does solve the problem is the wall. Because when there is a wall, they can't cross illegally, and then the families get to stay together.
There we go back to the wall.
The wall unites people.
He's doing the sort of the barrier defense. But listen, every country has a right to be able to protect its borders, right, and make sure that law and order is being observed. And I think that's what we also have to factor in as another interest here, in addition to making sure that children are cared for.
Can I just say the other thing is we should. Well, I know you have to go. That we have to figure out a way to go after the cartels and not each other.
Correct.
Stay with Fox News for continuing coverage of this issue in the Senate's IG report hearing. Special report up next.
This is a Fox News alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. President Trump is blaming Democrats tonight for the uproar over the separation of children and their parents who attempt to illegally enter the U.S. at the southern border. While the administration maintains it's simply following the law, congressional Democrats are flocking to the border to speak out about this issue. Some Republicans saying they're all just trying to exploit and embarrass Republicans. Democrats saying they're trying to force action that they insist the president could take on his own anytime. This This comes as the head of the FBI and the Justice Department Inspector General appear before a Republican-led Senate Judiciary Committee wanting answers about bias in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight. A busy day again from the North Lawn. John.
As usual, Bret, we wouldn't have it any other way. Late today, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen appeared here at the White House and pointed to a dramatic increase in the number of people who've been crossing the border illegally, more than 50,000 a month for the past 3 months, and a 400% increase in the number of so-called family units. But the new administration practice of criminally prosecuting people who come across the border illegally has created a very large political problem for the White House. With a storm of outrage growing over the separation of children from illegal immigrants, President Trump today laid the blame squarely on the Democrats.
I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're obstruction. They're really obstructionist. And they are obstructing.
Democrats are outraged at the administration's zero-tolerance policy at the border, where people who cross illegally are held for criminal prosecution and separated from any children they may have brought with them. Even some Republicans are critical. In a Washington Post op-ed, former First Lady Laura Bush wrote, "This zero-tolerance policy is cruel, it is immoral, and it breaks my heart." President Trump insists he was forced to implement the policy after a dramatic increase in the number of people, some of them criminals, crossing the border with children in tow.
The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. We can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
Administration officials say they are merely enforcing laws that are already on the books, something they say previous White Houses failed to do. But the political firestorm has heated to the point that the DHS secretary handled a late-day briefing at the White House.
Congress and the courts created this problem, and Congress alone can fix it. Until then, we will enforce every law we have on the books to defend the sovereignty and security of the United States.
The White House is calling on Congress to change the laws and reduce, if not eliminate altogether, the need to separate children from their parents. Across the administration, officials will keep up the pressure on lawmakers this week.
Members of Congress on the Democratic side say that you are using children as a lever to try to get them to take legislative action. What do you say to that?
I say that is a very cowardly response. It's clearly within their power to make the laws and change the laws. They should do so.
President Trump also weighed in on the Inspector General's report on the FBI Clinton email investigation. As a setup to today's congressional hearing, the president tweeting yesterday, "Why was the FBI's sick loser Peter Strzok working on the totally discredited Mueller team of 13 angry and conflicted Democrats when Strzok was giving crooked Hillary a free pass, yet telling his lover, Laura Lisa Page, that we'll stop Trump from becoming president? Witch hunt." President Trump insists the IG report proves there was no collusion between his campaign and Russia to influence the election. But his own FBI director today said the report doesn't even address that.
I don't think this report speaks to the special counsel investigation.
Democrats also accuse the president of using the IG report as a bludgeon to discredit the Mueller investigation, with tweets like, "Comey gave Strzok his marching orders. Mueller is Comey's best friend." Witch hunt.
He is distorting this report. He is weaponizing it to discredit the special counsel and undermine the rule of law in the United States of America.
The FBI director also said today that he does not believe that special counsel Robert Mueller is on a witch hunt. Asked about that late today, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the president is firm in his belief that the Robert Mueller investigation is indeed a witch hunt. Bret?
John Roberts, live at the North Lawn. John, thank you. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is leading a Democratic delegation into the heart of the immigration storm tonight. They're visiting a border facility where children are being held. National correspondent William LaJeunesse is in San Diego right now.
This is not about immigration. This is about humanity. It's about family. It's about who we are as a country.
For days, Democrats fanned out across the country to hammer President Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy.
It's appalling. It's un-American. It's unnecessary.
But it's also not new. The decision to prosecute any and all who cross the border illegally actually began as a pilot program under President Bush in 2006.
The zero-tolerance policy is intended to deter people from breaking the law.
Manny Padilla was chief patrol agent in Tucson when President Obama expanded Operation Streamline, increasing prosecutions some 200%, which advocates claim helped reduce illegal immigration. Today, the Trump administration makes the same case.
We cannot and will not encourage people to bring their children or other children to the country unlawfully by giving them immunity in the process.
The administration also hopes zero tolerance will reduce fraud.
We do not have the luxury of pretending that all individuals coming to this country as a family unit are in fact a family.
Homeland Security claims illegal immigrants fraudulently using children to pose as family increased 315% this fiscal year, exploiting a loophole to escape deportation. In prosecuting those cases, the department separated some 1,200 children from an adult.
The smugglers and traffickers know these loopholes better than our members of Congress.
Critics say Trump is separating children not to change the law, but as a bargaining chip to fund his wall.
How is it possible that we don't have a president who would rescind this zero inhumanity policy immediately?
So, moments ago, the administration stressed that entering the U.S. without permission is a crime. And basically, the problem is that when you detain women and children, the courts have said that you have to release them within 20 days. The administration wants Congress to close that loophole so families can stay together. But what we heard, Bret, from Democrats today is they want to ban this practice, and they believe that families should be handled administratively, not criminally. Back to you.
William Lajeunesse in San Diego. William, thank you. Well, which side will blink first, do you think, on zero tolerance? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag special report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. President Trump will head to Capitol Hill tomorrow to talk about immigration policy with congressional Republicans. This comes as GOP leaders hope to take action on immigration reform legislation this week and put an end to an issue that threatens to turn into a public relations disaster, as previously explained. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill tonight.
The zero-tolerance immigration policy is now making some Republicans on Capitol Hill uncomfortable.
It's clear this is a very sympathetic, tugs at your heartstrings sort of picture and narrative, but I think it's a little more complicated than that.
It is inconsistent with our American values to separate these children from their parents.
Collins and Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake sent this letter to the Secretaries of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services, writing Congress must know how the nation's laws are being implemented, quote, especially when the well-being of young children is at stake. There's also pressure from the left. California Democrat Senator Dianne Feinstein has offered a bill to ban separating families.
I never thought the United States of America would be separating children from their parents, infants from their parents, nursing mothers from their infants. It's terrible, and we've got to stop it.
President Trump met today with Republican Senators Richard Shelby and Shelley Moore Capito, with Mr. Trump wanting funding for his border wall and Shelby trying to pass funding bills in a bipartisan fashion. Across the Capitol, House lawmakers are expected to consider two different immigration reform plans this week: a conservative measure from Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte and a carefully crafted compromise based on President Trump's 4 pillars.
It's got border security in there. It's got funding for the wall the president really wants. It's got the technology and boots on the ground.
The president's expected to meet with House Republicans tomorrow night to personally make the case for addressing illegal immigration. McCall says lawmakers must get it done.
The threats, as I get briefed by the secretary and the ICE director, potential terrorists and drug cartels and all the other stuff is real.
On the issue of separating children from their parents, Texas Senator Ted Cruz has just introduced emergency legislation. It calls for hiring more border immigration judges, building temporary shelters to keep the families together, and for families that are determined that should not get asylum, deporting them within 2 weeks. We'll see if that's the fix, Bret.
Mike, another issue. What about the pending showdown between President Trump and the Senate over Chinese telecom firm ZTE?
Well, Bret, President Trump has his plan to help revive ZTE, the Chinese telecom giant. The Senate, even the president's allies, is looking to block that deal. They have included language inside a giant defense authorization bill that's coming up for a vote in the Senate this evening. Lawmakers are not interested in reviving a company that has been alleged to work with both Iran and North Korea. And so definitely a showdown between the U.S. Senate and the president on the ZTE issue. Bret.
All right, we'll follow that. Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. The man who wrote last week's report about the FBI's investigation into the Hillary Clinton email scandal was on Capitol Hill this afternoon to answer questions and defend his conclusions. Along with him, the FBI director, who is promising to change things and hold people accountable. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge shows us what happened.
I want you to reopen this investigation.
A senior Republican senator drilled down on the anti-Trump text messages between FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI lawyer Lisa Page. The 2016 meeting was about a, quote, insurance policy discussed in then FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe's office. Strzok texted about the meeting that McCabe apparently could not remember.
You asked Mr. McCabe.
We did. He said he did not recall.
So one of them's lying.
Senator Graham said the text reek of political bias, and the Inspector General's conclusions are off base.
I'm glad you found what you found, Mr. Horowitz. I'm not buying that the Clinton email investigation was on the up and up.
The first public testimony from Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz and FBI Director Christopher Wray about the Clinton email report divided along party lines.
Director Wray has quite a mess to clean up. I think he probably knows that.
The Inspector General found no evidence of political bias in the FBI's investigation of Secretary Clinton or in the decision not to pursue criminal charges.
Horowitz testified the FBI has also asked him to investigate former FBI Director James Comey for leaking at least one memo that documented private conversations with President Trump.
We received a referral on that from the FBI. We are handling that referral, and we will issue a report when the matter is complete.
Democrats pressed on alleged leaks in the fall of 2016 to former New York City mayor turned President Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani.
Can you assure the American people that there are no ongoing leaks from any office of the FBI to Rudolph Giuliani?
I'm certainly not aware of any. We are aggressively investigating a number of leaks, even as we speak.
Based on the report's findings, the FBI director said a half dozen employees could be disciplined, but he emphasized the mistakes and bad judgment were limited.
This report is focused on a specific set of events back in 2016 and a small number of FBI employees connected with those events.
One Republican was not satisfied.
Well, let's remember who that small number of employees was. The director of the FBI, the deputy director of the FBI, the leader of both the Clinton email investigation and the Russia investigation.
The Inspector General will testify for a second day in front of two House panels tomorrow. In a separate development, after months of pressure, the lawyer for FBI agent Peter Strzok has now confirmed that he will voluntarily testify before the House Judiciary Committee and any other congressional inquiry. Bret.
And that will be interesting. Catherine Harris live on the Hill. Catherine, thank you. Let's get some analysis now from legal scholar Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. Jonathan, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
What struck you from today's hearing?
Well, what was really interesting was the different narratives. The fact is that the IG was not likely to find that decisions were based on bias. But it is also not true that he didn't find bias. He actually found a lot of bias. It's just that he's not going to assume that the bias he found was the cause of decisions that were taken by the FBI.
Not his mandate, in other words.
That's right. And so unless someone was going to confess or help out with an email detailing some conspiracy, there wasn't going to be a finding that bias drove the decisions. But the Republicans were correct. The report is heavily laden with very disturbing statements of bias, including from the chief investigator. So the question then is, that wasn't his mandate. He's not going to make those assumptions. So where do you go from here? The answer in the Constitution is you go to Congress. Congress has an oversight duty to look into this. Some of these questions are simply not answered. You know, for example, Lindsey Graham was correct to raise the issue of Clinton's IT expert who was accused of lying repeatedly to the FBI, scrubbing her server after being told it was part of an investigation and something that Congress was looking for, and took all these actions that would have justified, in most of our view, an actual criminal charge. Instead, they gave him immunity. which at the time left all of us just dumbfounded why you would possibly do that. Those questions are just not answered because that's not the mandate.
After reading the IG report and seeing the testimony today, the case for obstruction of justice?
Well, I got to tell you, this IG report makes a difficult obstruction claim based on the Comey firing virtually inconceivable. You know, you have the Inspector General saying that Comey was insubordinate, that he deviated from policies, that these were serious violations. The FBI director echoed that today. Those are all good reasons to fire him. So unless you're going to make assumptions that Trump acted for every wrong reason instead of the obvious right ones, it's going to be real hard to make out a criminal case.
There were other teases of things to come. Another IG report. It sounded like several leak investigations and then even an investigation into Comey's personal use of email and whether there was classified material there.
Yeah, if I was Comey, I'd hear a whistle on the track because they're looking at his removing these memos from the FBI, which I've said from the beginning is clearly FBI material. The FBI's indicated that. One might have had classified information in it. I can't imagine the Inspector General looking at that and saying, okie doke, that's fine. You just feel anytime you're fired to remove any files you want and then leak them to the media. So that train's going to come down. It's not going to be good for Comey.
Let's turn to the first story, and the story that's gotten a lot of attention. What the administration is doing, what Democrats are doing, what Congress can or should do on this case with separating parents and children along the border.
No, it's a really sad story because, as usual in Washington, there's truth and falsity on both sides. Everyone's spinning this, and in the middle are all these kids. The fact is that the administration does not have to separate the kids from their mothers. That's a choice. That's a policy choice. It's also true that this issue has been forced by a change in policy to treat these as criminal matters, something many citizens support. I mean, Donald Trump was brought to power because he was pledged to get tough on immigration. Getting tough on immigration means to switch from a civil or administrative process to a criminal one. Once you do that, you have these type of separation problems. And so there is truth on both sides here. There are some agreements and some laws that govern how long and under what circumstances you hold children. But can the administration keep these families together? Yeah, I think they could.
There is a choice that is made at the border there. Rich Lowry indicated it in an op-ed a couple of weeks ago in which he wrote, the U.S. Marshals take custody of the adults when the children are held by the HHS. The prosecution of the adults for illegal entry usually happens quickly. Then if the adult wants to return home, she or he is reunited with her child, they're sent back together. Where it gets more complicated is if a migrant claims asylum. Trump administration wants to hold migrants pending adjudication of those cases. If they're released, there's a good chance they'll abscond. But even if the cases are handled quickly, i.e. in a couple of months, the government has to release the children sooner thanks to a 20-year-old consent decree and associated legal rulings. It's just one of the distortions that makes a rational policy at the border impossible. When accompanied children from Mexico cross the border, we can quickly return them home. An anti-trafficking law makes it nearly impossible to do that with unaccompanied children from Central America. Basically, as long as migrants know that they can get in, they will keep coming and bringing their children on this harrowing journey. If they claim asylum, they're essentially choosing to separate from their children.
Yeah, and I think this is all due to that paradigm shift. When the administration was treating this as a purely administrative process, not a criminal one, there were fewer complications that arose. Once you shift to a enforcement system, a criminal one, it magnifies these problems. But this law does create a glaring conflict in this 20-day clock running. So you can release, but then you have this gap of the mothers moving on a different track from the kids. That's a legitimate issue that the Trump administration wants to resolve.
And you're talking a lot of kids.
It's a lot of kids.
Secretary Nielsen said they could go to port of entries, legal port of entries, and claim asylum and stay together.
Right.
But this is dealing with illegal border crossings.
Yeah, what is unfortunate, I think both parties are playing chicken here, but there are kids in the car. And so I think that everyone's going to have to take a breather, rare time, and just get together and say, let's get this off the table. It's not good for this country. It's certainly not good for these kids.
Yeah, the images are horrible. Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, a top South Korean diplomat says the country wants an official end. The president says it will be a separate but equal branch of the U.S. military. He made the announcement at a meeting of the National Space Council. The president also vowed to return the U.S. to the moon and to reach Mars. Stocks were mixed today. The Dow lost 103. The S&P 500 dropped 6. The Nasdaq gained a fraction today. The U.S. Supreme Court has decided not to decide the broad issue of whether electoral maps should be allowed to give what some consider an unfair advantage to a political party. But justices did rule in a pair of state-specific cases. Correspondent Doug McElway looks at what all this means.
The High Court took a pass on 2 gerrymandering cases today, one from Wisconsin Democrats, the other from Maryland Republicans that challenged redrawn congressional and legislative districts. The Maryland case appeared to be a clear-cut case of gerrymandering or reshaping a district to benefit one party. Its rural 6th district had been represented by Republican Roscoe Bartlett for more than 20 years. But after the 2010 census, Maryland's Democratic legislature and then Democratic Governor Martin O'Malley reworked it to include heavily Democratic areas. It worked.
In 2010, Roscoe Bartlett won by 28 points. In 2012, after the gerrymander, he lost by 21 points.
In a deposition, O'Malley admitted, quote, "It was my intent to create a district where the people would be more likely to elect a Democrat than a Republican." But in today's opinion, the High Court dismissed the Republican argument on narrow grounds. Quote, "A court must consider whether the movieette has shown that he is likely to suffer irreparable harm in the absence of preliminary relief." The plaintiffs made no such showing.
Hasta la vista to gerrymandering.
In the Wisconsin case, it was Democrats who filed suit, complaining the Republican-controlled legislature redrew congressional districts to favor GOP candidates. But in his majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts rejected the Democrats' argument, ruling the plaintiffs, quote, "never followed up with the requisite proof that they had standing and a personal stake in the matter."
We were a little bit disappointed that the court did not set a standard for partisan gerrymandering. However, they did leave the door wide open.
Indeed, Chief Justice Roberts noted today, quote, "We leave for another day consideration of other possible theories of harm not presented here." And that suggests that the court may retake up the broader question of setting limits to gerrymandering in its next session when it takes up a North Carolina case. And that can mean clear nationwide guidance on just how far is too far, with voter maps set to be redrawn after the 2020 census. Bret?
Doug McElway outside the U.S. Supreme Court. Doug, thanks. Former British spy Christopher Steele gave a 4-hour deposition today in London. Steele is the author of the so-called Trump dossier. His deposition was part of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed by a Russian technology guru against Steele and BuzzFeed, which published that document. Up next, is the Korean War finally almost over? We'll explain. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in New York, as authorities say it appears a neighborhood beef is behind a fatal shooting that erupted at an all-night New Jersey arts festival. One suspect was killed. 22 people, including 2 other suspects, were injured early Sunday morning. About 1,000 people were attending the Art All Night Trenton Festival that showcases local art, music, food, and films when those shots rang out. Fox 29 in San Antonio, as authorities in South Texas say an SUV fleeing Border Patrol agents was traveling more than 100 miles per hour Sunday when it overturned, tossing out most of the 14 people inside. At least 5 were killed. Authorities say the SUV was being chased by an agent who suspected it was involved in smuggling. And this is a live look at San Francisco from our affiliate, Fox 2 there. One of the big stories there tonight, Apple unveiling upgrades in its next operating system that should help emergency response centers pinpoint the location of 911 calls. The company says the iPhone's next software will automatically deliver quicker and more reliable information to about 6,300 emergency response centers inside the U.S. A former Israeli government minister is behind bars tonight, charged with spying for arch-enemy Iran. Gonan Sejev was energy minister in the mid-1990s. Sejev is accused of giving information about energy and security to Iran. He spent 3 years in prison for attempting to smuggle drugs into Israel under an expired diplomatic passport in 2004. South Korea's foreign minister says her government wants a formal end to the Korean War by the end of this year. Such a landmark achievement is a side issue in President Trump's attempt to get North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Correspondent Benjamin Hall reports.
Across Southeast Asia, the push towards denuclearization continues amid a flurry of diplomacy, all in light of that historic summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. But despite the apparent success of that meeting, the key point of denuclearization has yet to be addressed, with Secretary of State Pompeo saying there will be no sanctions relief till it's been completed.
He has made very clear his commitment to fully denuclearize his country. That's everything, right? It's not just the weapon systems, it's everything.
Today, South Korea's top diplomat announced her government aims to declare a formal end to the Korean War by the end of this year, saying she was in close consultation with the US on this field. The announcement comes as representatives from both North and South continued to meet in the demilitarized zone to discuss how to forge closer bonds.
The government will do our best to improve inter-Korean relations and to recover national unity through sports exchanges.
It's been decided that athletes from the rival Koreas, some of whom have trained together in the past, will march under a single flag in the upcoming Asian Games in Indonesia. The two countries agreed to field combined teams in some events and will hold friendly basketball matches in Pyongyang and Seoul in the coming months. In other diplomatic moves, South Korean President Moon Jae-in will make a state visit to Russia later this week for a bilateral summit with Vladimir Putin. It will mark the first state visit to Russia by a South Korean president since 1999. And on Wednesday, President Trump holds a rally in Minnesota to celebrate what he calls his historic agreement with Kim Jong-un. Bret.
Benjamin Hall in London. Benjamin, thank you. The World Health Organization says compulsively playing video games now qualifies as a new mental health condition. The affliction will be called gaming disorder. Critics are already warning the designation may risk stigmatizing young video game players. The American Psychiatric Association is not on board, saying it might consider such a move in the future after more research. Up next, the panel on the uproar over immigrant children separated from their parents, the explanation from the Trump administration, and the politics around all of it. First, beyond our borders tonight, at least 4 people are dead following a powerful earthquake in Japan. Magnitude 6.1 quake rocked Osaka, the country's second largest city. Hundreds of people injured there, many homes without water or gas. Colombia's president-elect is appealing for unity following 5 decades of civil war. Conservative Ivan Duque received 54% of the vote to win Sunday's election in Colombia. He's promising to heal divisions, attack corruption, and to address a surge in cocaine production he calls a threat to national security. The chief executive of Volkswagen's Audi division has been taken into custody by German authorities. Rupert Stadler's arrest is the latest development in the emissions tampering scandal that has rocked VW since 2015. Volkswagen has already paid billions of dollars in fines, and many executives have been arrested. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Laws enacted by Congress, as we are sworn to do. As I said earlier today, surely it is the beginning of the unraveling of democracy when the body who makes the laws, instead of changing them, tells the enforcement body not to enforce the law. I ask Congress to ask this week so that we can secure our borders and uphold our humanitarian ideas. These two missions should not be pitted against each other. If we close the loopholes, we can accomplish both.
The pictures are horrible, the emotions are high, the criticism is all over the place, and the blame game has begun in earnest.
We can do this very quickly if the Democrats come to the table. Everybody wants to do it. We want to do it more than they do.
They will try to make us choose between these children and dreamers.
Our Democratic friends, every time they've had a chance to vote for a solution, they've voted against it. And so I hope they change their approach.
Put it on the floor and let the people's House vote. And yet they slumber still.
With that, let's bring in our panel. Former CIA analyst, nationally syndicated radio host Buck Sexton, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Mara, this seems like it's all coming to a head here.
Yes, and this has been confusing because this was a policy that was meant as a deterrent and described as a deterrent by Jeff Sessions and others. Don't bring your kids here because you're going to get separated from them if you cross illegally. But it turns out that I think President Trump wants credit for being tough on immigration. Today he says that we don't want our country to turn into a migrant camp or a holding pen for refugees, but he doesn't want to take responsibility for the unpopular part of the policy, which is the separation of kids from their mothers, so he's blaming the Democrats.
Molly.
You know, it's been talked of as a deterrent in part because of what's happened as people have learned what previous administrations did in handling this law. So you saw in previous administrations that when people crossed the border illegally and then claimed after they were caught that they were asylum seekers, they would just sort of be let go and asked to report back at a later date. A lot of people figured out this was a very good way to get into the country, that you would be able to just pass through if you brought children. That increased the number of children who were used as you were crossing the border. And so you started to see the number of cases of people crossing this way just skyrocket. So they need to kind of make a deterrent out of this since people have figured out this is a good way to cross. There is a moral cost to not following the nation's laws. There's a moral cost to separating children from their families. And it is important that Democrats and Republicans come together to respect the laws of the land and the need to keep families together.
Here's Secretary Nielsen today on those fraudulent claims going up.
In the last 5 months, we have a 314% increase in adults and children arriving at the border fraudulently claiming to be a family unit. This is obviously of concern. And separation can occur when the parent is charged with human smuggling. Under those circumstances, we would detain the parent in an appropriate secure detention facility separate from the child.
Buck, no matter how you explain it, whether you say they're going to seek asylum, they choose to separate, whether the percentages is 314%, the images and the emotion around this issue are a political dynamite.
That's why Trump, I think, understands this has to be handled. You can't have mothers being separated from incredibly young children. I do think that there'll be a good faith effort to solve that part of it, but there is a legacy of lawlessness here, and at some point, I think it becomes all too apparent that not just the Obama administration, but the current Democrat Party would prefer a situation where essentially anybody who can get into the country can stay. At some point, they have to be willing to answer the question, which illegal aliens are no longer allowed to stay in the country? They created this loophole, really a massive front door entryway into the United States by bringing a child with you. Then all of a sudden, it became quite easy to stay in the country. So you want to fix the issue of separating parents from children while being processed, but you also do have to enforce the law about people who are coming here illegally, and by the way, in many cases, claiming asylum in bad faith. They are saying what they've been told to say. The word is out. Secretary Nielsen has been addressing that. The young people who are coming who are unaccompanied, they are in jeopardy. There are many thousands of unaccompanied minors who have showed up at the border without anybody. So that's dangerous for them too. The incentive that was put in place by the Obama administration has to stop. This has to end.
The prospects of this forcing some kind of bipartisan solution, I mean, did it change? Because last week, the prospect of immigration law getting into law, a bill getting into law, was pretty small.
Look bad. There have been so many attempts over the past year. One was this deal, we'll give you full funding for the wall if you legalize the Dreamers. Now it's something akin to that, but also we want to do something about separating kids from their families. Donald Trump has asked for a 44% decrease in legal immigration, which the Democrats have balked at. I think that if you got it down to a pretty skinny bill, wall, Dreamers, the kids and family policies, maybe you could get something, but I don't know if that's where Congress is headed.
The dreaded skinny bill.
Yes,
we've heard that so many times before. Molly.
And Senator Ted Cruz has just introduced legislation that would deal with this. The big issue in play is that you can't detain children for more than 20 days. It takes so long to deal with adjudicating these illegal border crossings that then claim asylum that it ends up in family separation. His bill would require that you adjudicate this within 2 weeks, and if you fail to pass the test, you're deported as a family, and otherwise you can be reunited at that point.
We should say that Secretary Nielsen made a point to say if you go to a port of entry, that you can claim asylum and stay together as a family if there's room. And
if they think you're a real family.
And they think they can check you out as a real family. Here is a blast from the past, if you will, Hillary Clinton on this issue.
The president's attempt today to stoke fear of immigrants, not only in our country, but around the world by claiming that migrants in Germany are causing crime. In fact, crime in Germany is at its lowest level since 1992. Nor are these policies rooted in religion. In fact, those who selectively use the Bible to justify this cruelty are ignoring a central tenet of Christianity.
Spent a long time, Buck, on this issue, as you can imagine, touching all elements of it today.
Yeah, very dishonest in terms of what Mrs. Clinton is presenting there as what's happening in Germany. What happened since 1992 in terms of crime doesn't really matter. What matters is what has happened in Germany since the massive migrant wave. And there it's quite clear that you have had about a 10% increase in violent crime, in homicides, in rapes, the kind of crimes that people really care about and notice. And in a country like Germany, where you already have a low number, once those start to hit the airwaves. And by the way, I think there is a hesitation in some of these European countries to speak openly about these crimes. We see it in Sweden, we see it in Germany. The press doesn't want to deal with it. She's just wrong on the facts, or rather she's misconstruing the reality of what's happening there by cherry picking what's happened since 1992. They do have some very serious problems in Germany with the migrant wave. They have serious problems in other parts of Europe as well. And I think Mrs. Clinton knows that, but right now it's better to play to the emotions of some folks.
When you have Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush on the same side, on the same issue, does it create some bigger force?
Well, I think Laura Bush was a really extraordinary entry into this debate. She doesn't ever comment on things like this, and she did. You know, the other aspect of that tweet, he went after Angela Merkel. I've never seen a U.S. president do this before. He was suggesting that her hold on power was teetering on the brink because of this. It almost as if he was echoing his ambassador to Germany, who said that he wanted to encourage conservative parties to take over in these countries. I mean, that is the kind of meddling that I don't think he would like if a foreign leader did in our politics.
Last word, Molly.
Well, and Angela Merkel is having some political trouble,
in part because of how she coalition together.
In part because of how she's handled this immigration.
Yeah, but he was encouraging that.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Next up, the FBI chief.
Back to an election. It's clear from certainly the email, the text messages we've talked about with regard to Mr. Strzok that he had, as we say here, a biased state of mind. We were focused on the very specific investigative decisions we looked at, and what was significant about and I'm now talking about the pre-July 5 announcement decisions, was that Strzok, Page, and others were not the sole decision makers there. They were team decisions and, in many cases, prosecutors' decisions.
Michael Horowitz, the IG, talking about his report, sitting alongside the FBI Director Chris Wray. We're back with the panel. Molly, what'd you take from that hearing?
You know, it's so interesting to see Horowitz sitting next to Wray. Horowitz is going through what he discovered in his 586-page report. He's talking about how disconcerting it was, what he found, the lack of professionalism, the bad judgment in the decision-making, the breathtaking bias that he came across. And then it gets to Wray, and Wray keeps saying, it's not really a big deal. It's just a few people. We just can solve everything with a little bit of training. And it was a very weird moment where when people are concerned about the problems at the FBI, in a way, Wray downplaying it made it seem like the problem is much worse, that he wasn't taking it seriously. Senator Hatch had to say to him something like, you say it's a few people, but do I need to point out to you that one of them was the FBI director, another was the deputy director, another was the guy in charge of the investigations? So I think it would be good on Wray to at least pretend to take this issue a little bit more seriously than he appears to be right now.
There's a lot of questioning, Mara, about the president's tweet where he says the IG report totally destroys James Comey and all of his minions, including the great lovers, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who started this disgraceful witch hunt against so many innocent people. It will go down as a dark and dangerous period in American history. Essentially, it says it clears him, and there is no Russia collusion, which is what he always says. Look, but he's pointing to the bias that is found in the report.
There's no doubt the bias found animus on a part of these FBI agents against him. The report also gave him a lot of ammunition to use against James Comey, but it did not deal with the issue of collusion. And it's just not true that this report exonerated him. It was an even-handed report, gave him plenty of ammunition to use against James Comey and others, but it did not deal with the issue of collusion.
But if you're asking about the actual predicate for the entire investigation,
Strzok and Page were not the people who started the investigation.
Was absolutely lead on the Trump investigation. investigation.
No.
And here you have him saying that we will stop Trump from getting elected. A few days later, they talk about an insurance policy against him being elected. The idea that this isn't exonerating for Donald
So
Trump,
you think
I think
that
is very hard to
is so you reject that as an even-handed, fair, good investigation?
No, and Horowitz himself said this was just looking at the Clinton probe. The fact is, though, the fact is the same exact people were working on the Clinton probe as the Trump probe.
Do an investigation of that, but that's not what he said.
So what we learned from this IG report, if you read through all 500 plus pages, you see that they're talking quite a bit about their desire to stop Donald Trump. So that is an exonerating issue for
which is laying the groundwork for another IG report and more things to come.
It's tough to take a report seriously that says as its fundamental conclusion that there was no really important bias when it's essentially a few hundred pages talking about bias and talking about missteps and failures. I think also today, by the way, from the hearing, every time that there was an opportunity to find out, well, was the FBI forthcoming with information? Were they able to share the text messages in a timely fashion? No, quite the opposite. They were obviously trying to at least slow roll, if not entirely hide information. And anybody who's worked in law enforcement knows that
they feel that's why she's not in the White House today.
But anyone who's worked in law enforcement will tell you that when normal people do that, they actually can go to prison. So when the FBI does it, apparently it's just that it's slow and it's a bureaucracy. So I think that was really undermining the premise that we can take them at their word going forward when they do look into the Russia collusion aspect of this probe, which, by the way, I think is going to be a lot worse in terms of bias and everything else than what we've seen so far on the Hillary email side.
It sounds like we are, this is one piece, and we're going to get a very detailed piece about the early days of the Trump investigation.
Yeah, I think we will. And, you talk to Democrats, they believe that James Comey and all the things he did in the email investigation cost her the White House.
And it is just stunning how much we need to learn about what the FBI was doing as it probed the Trump campaign. I think it would be really helpful for the FBI